All right. This problem set is going to be focused on supply and demand problems. So can you correctly solve supply and demand problems in graphs? So question 1 is, suppose you witness a decrease in the price of corn and an increase in the quantity of corn. Which scenario best explains this situation? And this is multiple choice. So which would best explain an increase or a decrease in the price and an increase in the quantity of corn? A, doctors announce corn may cure cancer. B, farmers believe the price of corn will be higher next year. C, consumers believe the price of corn will be lower next month. Or D, a new machine allows corn to be grown and harvested more efficiently. Let me zoom in for you. Okay, so part 1, or question 1, answer this question, the multiple choice question. And then question 2 is a little bit more challenging. So if there's an increase in the taste of IMAX, what will be the effect on the equilibrium quantity and price of IMAX and Apple TV, a substitute in production? So here, I want you to draw a market for IMAX and a market for Apple TVs using correctly labeled supply and demand graphs. So I want to understand what's going to happen to equilibrium quantity and price for IMAX and equilibrium quantity and price for Apple TVs. So the one for IMAX is very straightforward, but Apple TVs is going to be a little bit more complicated. So can you understand how IMAX and Apple TVs are related? So go ahead and pause the video now so you can solve the problems. And then when you're finished, go ahead and hit play. Okay, question 1. Suppose you witness a decrease in the price of corn and a simultaneous increase in the quantity of corn. Which scenario best describes this or best explains this situation? So here, we want to understand which of the following would we see this. So we see demand and supply, and we have equilibrium, P star and Q star. And then we want to know the price of corn goes down, but the quantity of corn increases. So the quantity has to increase, so that means that supply or demand has to increase. Well, if we increase demand, we would increase the quantity, but the price would also go up. However, if we increase supply, so supply shifts this way, price would go down and quantity would increase. So this question is really asking, which scenario best explains an increase in supply, which causes a decrease in the equilibrium price of corn and an increase in the equilibrium quantity of corn? So here, Q star prime and P star prime. So price goes down, quantity goes up. Okay, so we want to know which of the following would cause this. Part A, doctors announce that corn may cure cancer. So is this going to affect supply or demand? And in this case, I think it's pretty clear that it would affect the demand of corn. More people would start eating corn, so it would affect demand. And in fact, demand would increase. So here, demand would increase. So that can't be the right answer because we're looking for an increase in supply. Part B, farmers believe the price of corn will be higher next year. So farmers here, that's going to be the suppliers of corn. So we're looking at supply. But if they think that the price of corn will be higher next year, corn becomes more profitable next year as compared to this year. So instead of planting corn this year, farmers may plant soy this year so they can plant corn next year when the price is higher. So in this case, supply will decrease, which is the opposite of what we want. Part C, consumers believe the price of corn will be lower next month. So here it's consumers are the buyers of corn. So we're talking about demand. And if they believe the price of corn will be lower next month, that means that they're going to buy more corn next month as compared to this month when the price is lower. So demand will decrease. So that can't be the right answer. And then lastly, D, a new machine allows corn to be grown and harvested more efficiently. So here we have better technology. So we have a magical combine that plants the seed, fertilizes it, and then it harvests it more efficiently. So in the same amount of time, corn growers can have more corn than they could before in a given amount of time. So here we're talking about the supply of corn, and with better technology, we know that supply is going to increase. So here, supply increases only on part D. So the best scenario that explains what we see happening to the equilibrium price and quantity of corn is D, a new machine allows corn to be grown and harvested more efficiently, or an increase in technology. Question 2, let's see. Let me erase this, and then I'm going to go through and we'll just write up the answers up here. Okay, so make sure you have this down. And here we're just going to go through the steps for solving supply and demand problems. So question 2, if there's an increase in the taste of iMacs, so consumers prefer iMacs instead of PCs, what will be the effect on the equilibrium quantity and price of iMacs and Apple TV, a substitute in production? Okay, and I want each market drawn in a correctly labeled supply and demand graph. So we're going to have two markets, iMacs and Apple TV. And we have quantity and price, and quantity and price. So step 1 is always graph an initial equilibrium. So we have demand, which is downward sloping, supply, which is upward sloping, and where the two intersect, it gives us equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. And then we have an initial equilibrium for Apple TVs as well. Okay, so we have our equilibrium, and that's a star right there. Okay, so we have our initial equilibrium. Step 1 is complete. Step 2 is we have to identify, does our shock affect supply or demand? So our shock is an increase in the taste of iMacs. So here we're looking at increase in taste or preferences, which if you look back, that's going to be a demand shock. So here, more people are going to prefer iMacs instead of PCs. So it's going to affect demand. Step 3 is, does it increase or decrease demand? So if more people prefer iMacs, what happens to the demand for iMacs? Well, in that case, people are going to buy less PCs but buy more iMacs because that's what they prefer. So the demand will increase for iMacs. Step 4 is draw this effect, or graph it. So here we graph an increase in the demand for iMacs, which looks like that. So just a rightward shift in demand. And then step 5 is graph our new equilibrium. And our new equilibrium occurs where the new demand curve equals supply, and that occurs at a higher equilibrium price and a higher equilibrium quantity. So if more people prefer to buy iMacs, we can expect the price of iMacs to increase, and we would see more in the quantity of iMacs produced and sold. Okay, so step 1 is complete. So we have one market done. The other market is what happens to Apple TVs, a substitute in production, as a result of this. Okay, so we have to think about how would Apple react now because it's a substitute in production. Okay, So step 1 is graph an initial equilibrium, which we have. Step 2 is, does this shock affect supply or demand? Well, if I'm buying an iMac, does that affect how much, or people prefer iMacs, does that affect how many Apple TVs people are going to buy? Not really, because they're not really relatable, right? This does computing stuff. This is a TV thing. So consumers are separate markets. However, for Apple, the supplier, they make iMacs, but if they make iMacs, that means that they forfeit Apple TVs, or vice versa, right? It's a substitute in production. So here, we know that Apple TVs is going to be affected by a supply shock. Okay, so supply is going to shift in the market for Apple TVs. Step 3 is, does that shock increase or decrease supply? So we have to think, how does Apple respond in producing Apple TVs when the price of iMacs increases? Well, if the price of iMacs increases, that means that iMacs become more profitable for Apple to sell. So Apple is going to make more iMacs, right? So they're increasing the quantity, or the price is increasing, so it's more profitable for iMacs. So if you're a company and you had to decide, should I supply more or less Apple TVs when this is more profitable, I would switch production from Apple TVs to iMacs. So my production would fall, our supply is going to decrease. Step 4, graph it. So we graph a decrease in supply, S prime. And then step 5 is graph our new equilibrium. And equilibrium happens where our new supply curve equals our demand curve. And what we're going to see is, in the market for Apple TVs, we can expect to see less Apple TVs being produced and sold, but Apple TVs to go up in price. So if people prefer iMacs instead of PCs, all of a sudden, we can expect quantities and the price of iMacs to go up, and we'd expect the price of Apple TVs, but the price of Apple TVs to increase, but the quantity of Apple TVs to decrease. And this is our supply and demand graphs. I have one more question for you, so I'm going to go ahead and erase this. And the last one is going to be a little bit more complicated. So the one that we did was a little bit more complicated because you had to find the connection between Apple TVs and iMacs. And then our last problem question 3 is, from the graph below, I want you to find consumer surplus, producer surplus, and total market surplus. So we have quantity and price, and demand and supply. Okay, so for this problem, I want you to find consumer surplus, producer surplus, and total surplus, given this market. So go ahead and pause it, and when you're finished, we'll go through the math. Okay, so part 1, find consumer surplus for this market. And we know that consumer surplus is the total benefit that consumers receive from trade. So here, consumer surplus is going to be the area underneath the demand curve, but above price. So one person is willing to pay $80 for whatever this good is, but they only have to pay $60, so that person gets a total net benefit of $20. And if you add that up, that's going to be the area of this triangle right here. Okay, so we want to find the area of this triangle. So consumer surplus is going to be the area of this triangle. It's going to be green. And if we do that, we know that the area of the triangle is 1/2 base times height. So this is 1/2 base times height. Or that's going to be 1/2. The base goes from 0 to 400 because 400 are sold. So 400 people are enjoying this product. So the base is 400. And the height is 80 minus 60, which is 20. So 1/2 times 20 is 10, times 400 gives us a total consumer surplus of $4,000. So after all 400 people have bought one of these at price $60, as a result, they're going to be, all 400 people are going to be totally benefited, or the whole market is going to be happier by $4,000 as a result. For consumer surplus, hold on here, let me grab it. Okay. For producer surplus, that's going to be defined as how much better producers are as a result of trade, or it's a measure of their profitability. So one firm can produce this thing for $12, it's their marginal cost, but they sell it for $60. So for that person, they're making $48 of profit. And we're going to add up the profits for all 400 of these. And producer surplus is going to be the area above the supply curve, but below the market price across all of them sold. So out of 400. So producer surplus is going to be the area of this triangle, the blue triangle. Okay. So again, that's a triangle. So we have 1/2 base times height, or it's going to be 1/2 the base goes from 0 to 400. And the height is 60 minus 12, or 48. So let's see. We have 1/2 times 48, which is 24, times 40, or times 400. And if you do the math correct, you should come up with $9,600. So, after all is said and done, producers make a profit of selling all 400 of them after they're produced and selling them all of $9,600. So producers are $9,600 better off. So now we want to find total surplus. And total surplus is going to be defined as how much better off is the entire market as a result of trade. So that's going to be a measure of how much better consumers are better off, plus how much producers are better off. So total surplus is going to be equal to consumer surplus plus producer surplus. Or that means that it's going to be $4,000 for consumer surplus plus $9,600 for producer surplus. And if you add those together, you should get $13,600. So as a result of trade, the total market is better off by $13,600. So this is the efficiency gained from trade as a result, as compared to no trade in this situation. And that would be, so this is the end of our supply and demand questions.